Hello everyone. Welcome to Story Hub channel. Discover real stories of wife betrayals, shocking twists and turns and their secrets. Hit the subscribe button and get to our story. The sun was sinking lower in the sky, bathing our home in a soft golden light, a place I had always seen as our safe haven. It was a simple two-story house, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood where everyone knew each other by name. The kind of place where kids' laughter was as familiar as the birds chirping in the trees, where life rolled along at a steady, comforting pace. From the outside, it looked like we had it all: a beautiful wife, two amazing kids, and a marriage that had weathered the years. It was my birthday, a day that always held a special meaning for me, not just because of the gifts or the cake, but because it reminded me of the life I had built, the family I held dear above everything else. I stood in the doorway of our living room, watching as our 8-year-old twins, Jack and Lily, played with their toys on the floor. Their faces were flushed with excitement, their laughter as pure as a sweet melody. They were my pride and joy, the reason I put in the hard work every single day. My love for them went beyond what words could ever capture. And then there was Rachel, my wife, my anchor, my partner, the woman I had promised to love and protect for the rest of my days. She was in the kitchen, her slender figure moving with grace as she prepared dinner. The aroma of roast chicken and herbs filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of her perfume that I always found irresistible. Rachel had a way of turning heads without even trying, with her long, dark hair cascading down her back and those piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right into your soul. She was stunning. Even after 10 years of marriage, she still had the power to make my heart race. But it wasn't just her beauty that had drawn me to her all those years ago. Rachel had a sharp mind, a quick wit, and a laugh that could light up the darkest day. We had met in college, two young people with big dreams, and we fell for each other fast and hard. I can still picture the first time I saw her, sitting under a tree on campus, lost in a book. Her beauty caught my eye, but it was her intelligence and zest for life that won me over. We spent our days talking about everything and nothing, our nights wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of a future as bright as the stars. Marriage came soon after graduation, followed by the whirlwind of life, careers, a mortgage, and then the twins. Our love was the steady force that kept us grounded through it all. Sure, there were rough patches, moments when we argued, when the stresses of life felt overwhelming, but we always found our way back to each other, stronger than before. I never doubted she was the one for me, the woman who completed me in every way. But on this particular day, my birthday, something felt off. I noticed it in the way Rachel moved, in the way she avoided meeting my eyes as she set the table for dinner. There was a tension in the air, something unspoken hanging between us like a dark cloud. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself she was just tired. After all, being a mother to two energetic kids was no small feat, and Rachel had always handled the responsibilities of our home with grace and patience. But today, there was a distance in her that I couldn't quite place. A coldness in her demeanor that left me feeling unsettled. She walked over to me with a small, almost forced smile, her eyes missing the usual warmth they held. "Happy birthday," she whispered softly, leaning in to kiss my cheek. Her lips felt cool against my skin, and although the gesture was familiar, it lacked the affection I was used to. "Thanks," I replied, slipping an arm around her waist, trying to pull her closer. But she quickly moved away, turning her attention back to the kitchen, leaving me standing there with a strange sense of unease. "I've got a surprise for you later," she added, her voice light, but there was something underneath, something that didn't sit right with me. I couldn't quite figure it out, but it made my stomach churn. "A surprise?" I asked, trying to meet her gaze, but she was already busying herself with the dinner preparations. "Yes, something special," she murmured, not looking up. I tried to shake off the doubt creeping in, telling myself I was just being paranoid. Rachel had always been great at surprises, always knew how to make me feel special. This was just another one of her thoughtful gestures, I told myself. But as I stood there watching her, a strange feeling settled over me. It was the way her hands trembled slightly as she chopped the vegetables, the way she bit her lip, lost in thought. There was a spark in her eyes, one I hadn't seen in years. But instead of bringing comfort, it filled me with a sense of dread. I wanted to believe that everything was fine, that this was just another birthday, another celebration of the life we had built together. But deep down, something told me that this day would be different, that the surprise she had planned would be one I would never forget. Dinner that night was a quiet affair, the kind where the clinking of utensils against plates filled the heavy silence between us. The kids, as usual, were lost in their own world, chattering away about their day at school, completely oblivious to the tension simmering beneath the surface. I found myself stealing glances at Rachel, trying to make sense of the unease gnawing at me. Something was off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Rachel looked as stunning as ever, but tonight, there was something different about her. She wore a deep red dress that I hadn't seen in years. It hugged her figure perfectly, the rich color highlighting the curves that had always made my heart race. Normally, seeing her dressed like that would have sparked desire in me, but tonight, it only deepened the pit in my stomach. The dress, the way she moved, it all felt too deliberate, too calculated. The kids finished their meal, their plates clean, and I sent them off to get ready for bed. "I'll be up in a bit to tuck you in," I promised, ruffling Jack's hair as he ran past me. Their laughter echoed down the hallway, fading as they disappeared into their rooms. With the kids out of sight, I turned to Rachel, hoping to bridge the distance that had settled between us. "Rachel," I began softly, "is everything okay? You've been distant tonight." She paused, her fork hovering over her plate, and for a brief moment, I thought she might actually open up to me. But then, just as quickly, the moment passed. She shook her head, a tight smile on her lips. "I'm fine, just a little tired. You know how it is." But I didn't know. The Rachel I knew would have let me in, would have told me what was really on her mind. I wanted to press her, to ask what was really going on, but something in her eyes warned me not to push too hard. Instead, I forced myself to nod, accepting her answer, even though it felt like a lie. "If you're sure," I replied, though the doubt in my voice was hard to hide. She stood up abruptly, gathering the plates and carrying them to the sink. I watched as she moved with a precision that felt almost robotic, like she was deliberately avoiding any chance of further conversation. The coldness between us, the rift that had appeared in the foundation of our marriage, gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only getting worse. When the dishes were done, she turned back to me, her expression softening just a little. "Why don't you grab your jacket?" she suggested, her voice light, but with an undertone I couldn't quite place. "I have a surprise for you." "A surprise?" I echoed, trying to sound enthusiastic despite the unease that had settled deep in my chest. She nodded, that same tight smile still on her lips. "Yes, something special for your birthday. Come on, let's go." I hesitated for a moment, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end, but I didn't want to ruin the evening by being overly suspicious. Rachel had always been good at surprises, always knew how to make me feel special, and maybe I was just reading too much into things. So I grabbed my jacket from the closet and followed her out to the car. The drive was quiet, the city lights blurring as we sped through the streets. Rachel's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white against the dark leather. She didn't say much, just the occasional glance in my direction, her expression impossible to read. I tried to start a conversation, but she deflected my questions with vague responses, leaving me more and more on edge as we drove further away from our familiar neighborhood. Finally, after what felt like forever, she pulled the car into an empty parking lot behind an old, run-down building on the outskirts of town. The place looked abandoned, its windows boarded up, and the only light came from a flickering street lamp on the corner. My unease turned into full-blown anxiety as I looked around, trying to figure out where we were and why she had brought me here. "Rachel, what is this?" I asked, my voice betraying the nervousness I felt. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she turned off the engine and sat there in silence, staring straight ahead. I could see the tension in her posture, the way her breath came in shallow, quick bursts. Finally, she turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that sent a chill down my spine. "Come with me," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. I hesitated, every instinct screaming that something was wrong, but the love I had for her, the trust built over 10 years of marriage, urged me to follow. I opened the door and stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. Rachel walked around the car and took my hand, leading me toward the building. My heart pounded in my chest as we approached the door, an old rusted thing that groaned loudly when she pushed it open. Inside, the darkness was thick, pierced only by the faint light filtering in from the street lamp outside. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of dust and decay. "Rachel, where are we?" I asked, my voice echoing off the walls. She didn't respond, just tightened her grip on my hand as she led me deeper into the building. We walked down a long, narrow hallway, our footsteps muffled by the cracked and peeling linoleum floor. The further we went, the more my fear grew until it became a tangible weight, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. Finally, she stopped in front of a door at the end of the hallway. She turned to me, and in the dim light, I could see that unsettling spark in her eyes again, the one that had filled me with unease earlier in the evening. But now, there was something else. Something darker, more sinister. "Here's your surprise," she said softly, and before I could even react, the door behind me burst open, and everything went black as a sharp blow to the back of my head sent me crashing to the ground. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, a void where time lost all meaning, where nothing made sense. When I finally began to regain consciousness, it felt like wading through thick, murky water. My head pounded with an excruciating pain that blurred my vision as I struggled to open my eyes. Everything was hazy, the world spinning as I tried to piece together where I was and what had happened. Gradually, the room came into focus. I was lying on my side, the cold, hard floor beneath me offering no comfort to the aches that had settled deep into my bones. The first thing I noticed was the dim, flickering light above me, casting long, eerie shadows across the walls. Then I heard it. The sound, faint at first but growing louder with each passing second. The sound of someone breathing, a low, steady rhythm that wasn't mine. Panic surged through me as I tried to push myself up, but my arms felt like lead, weak and trembling from the blow that had knocked me out. I managed to lift my head just enough to take in my surroundings, my heart sinking as the reality of my situation began to set in. In the center of the room, bathed in that sickly pale light, was a mattress. It was the only piece of furniture in the otherwise empty space, and on it sat Rachel. She was no longer wearing the red dress from earlier. Instead, she had changed into something even more revealing, a tight black lace outfit that clung to her body, leaving little to the imagination. Her legs were crossed, her posture relaxed, as if she were waiting for something or someone. Her face, however, was a mask of cold indifference, the warmth I had always known in her eyes completely gone. "Rachel," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, thick with confusion and fear. "What's going on? Where are we?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled, like a predator stalking its prey. Her heels clicked against the concrete floor as she approached me, each step sending a jolt of fear through my body. I tried to move, to get up, but before I could even attempt to stand, a strong hand gripped my shoulder, pushing me back down effortlessly. My breath caught in my throat as I turned my head, and that's when I saw them. The three men standing behind me, looming over me like shadows. They were the same ones I had glimpsed earlier, their faces hard, their eyes filled with a cold, merciless intent. "Rachel," I pleaded, my voice trembling as panic began to set in. "Please, what is this? Why are they here?" She looked down at me, her expression unreadable. "You're finally awake," she said softly, her voice calm, almost gentle. "Good." Before I could fully process her words, the men closed in. One of them grabbed me by the collar, yanking me to my feet with a force that sent a sharp pain shooting through my neck. I tried to fight back, but I was no match for their strength. The first punch landed squarely in my stomach, knocking the wind out of me and doubling me over in pain. I gasped for air, but another punch followed, this time to my ribs, then another to my jaw. The world spun around me, the pain overwhelming, but they didn't stop. Fists rained down on me, blow after blow, each one more brutal than the last. I could taste blood in my mouth, feel its warmth as it trickled down my chin. My knees buckled, but they wouldn't let me fall, holding me up just to continue the beating. Through the fog of pain, I could hear Rachel's voice, cold and detached. "You're probably wondering why I'm doing this," she said, her tone almost casual, like she was discussing the weather. "Why I brought you here." I tried to respond, to beg her to stop, but my voice was gone, drowned out by the agony that consumed my body. All I could do was listen as she continued. "I'm tired, you know," she said, pacing slowly around the room. "Tired of playing the perfect little housewife. Tired of living up to your expectations. Tired of pretending to be happy." She stopped in front of me, her eyes piercing into mine as the men momentarily paused their assault, letting her words sink in. 10 years, she spat, her voice dripping with venom. 10 years I've put up with you, your demands, your rules. I've sacrificed everything for you, for this family, and what have I gotten in return? Nothing but a life that suffocates me. Her words cut deeper than any of the punches. The woman standing before me was a stranger, a twisted reflection of the wife I thought I knew. "Rachel," I choked out. My voice barely a whisper, I thought. "I thought we were happy." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "Happy? You think I was happy? I've been miserable for years, trapped in a life I never wanted, with a man I grew to despise. But I stayed, because that's what good wives do, right? They stay, they endure." She leaned in closer, her face inches from mine, her voice dropping to a whisper. "But not anymore. I'm done being the obedient little wife. I'm done pretending. Tonight, I'm taking back control, and you're going to learn what it feels like to be helpless, to be at someone else's mercy." The men behind me didn't need any further instructions. They resumed their brutal assault, each punch and kick delivered with a precision that left no part of me untouched. I tried to scream, to beg for mercy, but the pain was overwhelming, my voice lost in the storm of blows. Rachel watched, her expression one of cold satisfaction, as if she were finally exacting the revenge she had longed for. And as the darkness began to close in on me once again, I realized that the woman I had loved, the woman I had devoted my life to, was gone. In her place was a monster, one who would stop at nothing to make me pay for sins I didn't even know I had committed. My body throbbed with pain, every nerve screaming in agony as I lay crumpled on the cold concrete floor. The taste of blood filled my mouth, mixing with the bitter tang of fear that had settled deep in my gut. My vision blurred with tears as I struggled to stay conscious, to make sense of the nightmare unfolding around me. Every breath was a battle, each one a reminder of the brutality I had just endured. I could barely lift my head, but I forced myself to look up, to try and understand what was happening. And that's when I saw them. The two men who had just beaten me within an inch of my life, now turning their attention to Rachel. They moved toward her with a predatory hunger, and the realization of what was about to happen sent a fresh wave of nausea crashing over me. Rachel didn't flinch, didn't resist. Instead, she welcomed them, her lips curving into a cruel smile as they reached for her. They tore at her dress, the black lace falling away in tatters, revealing the bare skin beneath. My heart pounded in my chest, the horror of the situation paralyzing me, rooting me to the spot, even though every instinct screamed at me to stop this, to save her, to save us. But there was nothing left to save. The woman I once loved, the mother of my children, was gone, replaced by someone I couldn't even recognize. The men wasted no time. One of them grabbed her by the waist, pulling her close, while the other pushed her down onto the mattress. She let out a low, throaty moan as they began to undress, their hands moving over her body with a familiarity that made bile rise in my throat. And then, with a sickening inevitability, they began to use her right there in front of me, their bodies moving in sync as they took her in ways I had never even imagined. My mind recoiled at the sight, my stomach twisting with a mix of revulsion and heartbreak. This wasn't just betrayal. It was the complete and utter destruction of everything I held dear. My world, my life was being torn apart right before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. As I watched, helpless and broken, Rachel turned her head to look at me. There was no shame in her eyes, no remorse, only a cold, calculated satisfaction. She wanted me to see this, wanted me to suffer, to feel every ounce of pain she had endured for the past 10 years. "Why do you think he isn't touching me?" she asked, her voice dripping with malice as she nodded toward the third man, the one who had stayed back while the others claimed her. Her words pierced through the haze of pain and disbelief, cutting straight to my core. I turned my head slightly, wincing at the sharp pain that shot through my neck. The third man was still standing there, watching me with a look that sent chills down my spine. He was calm, almost eerily so, and that's when I realized where this was heading. My heart dropped into my stomach as he began to undress, his movements slow and deliberate. Panic surged through me, my mind screaming in denial at the horrifying truth that was beginning to dawn on me. I tried to crawl away, tried to push myself up and escape, but my body wouldn't cooperate, my limbs too weak and battered from the beating I had just endured. Rachel's laughter echoed in the small room, cruel and mocking, as she watched my futile attempts to get away. "You always thought you were in control, didn't you?" she sneered, her voice filled with venom. "But tonight, you'll learn what it really means to be powerless." The man behind me was now fully undressed, his presence looming over me like a dark shadow. A surge of pure terror unlike anything I had ever experienced before washed over me. The pain, the humiliation, the betrayal. It was all too much, threatening to drown me in a wave of despair. As the man's hands gripped my shoulders, I felt my world collapse completely. The reality of what was about to happen, what Rachel had orchestrated, hit me like a freight train, leaving me shattered and broken in a way that no physical pain ever could. This was the final, unthinkable betrayal. The moment when everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, was ripped away, leaving nothing but emptiness and despair. In that moment, as the man's hands tightened around my shoulders, something inside me snapped. The fear and pain that had paralyzed me suddenly gave way to a surge of raw adrenaline, a primal instinct to survive that took over every fiber of my being. It was as if my body, pushed to the brink, had found a reserve of strength I didn't know I had, fueled by the sheer desperation to escape the nightmare that was unfolding. I felt my muscles tense, the pain in my ribs and jaw fading into the background as adrenaline surged through me like wildfire. The man behind me was close now, his grip strong, but I wasn't about to go down without a fight. Not like this. I wouldn't let them break me. I wouldn't let her win. With a sudden burst of energy, I twisted my body violently, wrenching myself free from his hold. The movement was driven by pure instinct, and it caught him off guard. I saw the surprise in his eyes as I broke loose, a momentary flicker of doubt that I seized upon. Without thinking, I swung my elbow back with all the force I could muster, aiming for his face. The impact was solid, my elbow connecting with his nose with a sickening crunch. He stumbled back, a growl of pain escaping his lips as he clutched his face, blood already beginning to pour from his nostrils. The sight of his blood, the proof that I had hurt him, only fueled the fire inside me. But there was no time to celebrate. The other two men, still entangled with Rachel, realized what was happening and quickly disengaged. I could see the fury in their eyes as they turned toward me, their bodies tensed and ready to retaliate. They were bigger, stronger, and in better shape than me, but I didn't care. I had nothing left to lose. One of them lunged at me first, his fist aiming for my face. I barely managed to duck in time, his knuckles grazing the side of my head as I moved. The near miss only fueled my determination. I countered with a punch of my own, landing a solid hit to his midsection that made him double over, gasping for air. I didn't stop, didn't let up. I couldn't afford to. I followed up with a knee to his ribs, feeling the satisfying crunch beneath my leg as he cried out in pain. But the other man was on me before I could finish him off, grabbing me from behind and locking his arms around my chest in a crushing bear hug. The air was forced from my lungs as he squeezed, lifting me off the ground with ease. I struggled in his grip, kicking out wildly, but he was strong, too strong. I could feel the panic rising again, the edges of my vision darkening as I fought to breathe. I knew I had to act fast, had to do something before I lost consciousness. Summoning what little strength I had left, I threw my head back, slamming it into his face with all the force I could muster. The impact was jarring, pain exploding through my skull. But it worked. I felt his grip loosen as he howled in pain, blood spraying from his mouth where my head had connected with his teeth. As soon as his hold weakened, I twisted my body, slipping out of his grasp and turning to face him. He was still reeling from the blow, dazed and disoriented, and I took the opportunity to land a hard punch to his jaw, sending him stumbling back. The adrenaline coursing through my veins dulled the pain from my battered body, allowing me to keep going, to keep fighting. But the first man, the one with the bleeding nose, had recovered by now, and he wasn't going to let me off easy. He charged at me, his fists swinging wildly. I barely had time to react, ducking and weaving to avoid his blows, but one of them caught me square in the chest, knocking the wind out of me and sending me sprawling to the ground. Before I could get up, he was on top of me, his fists raining down with brutal force. I tried to shield my face, but each punch felt like a sledgehammer, driving me deeper into the concrete floor. My vision blurred, the pain overwhelming, but I refused to give in. I wouldn't let them break me. With a last, desperate effort, I grabbed a piece of broken glass from the floor, probably from the bottle that had shattered during the scuffle. I swung it upward, the jagged edge slicing through the air and into his arm. He let out a scream, jerking back in shock as blood poured from the wound. I used the moment to push him off of me, scrambling to my feet just as the second man, the one I had headbutted, came at me again. But this time I was ready. I ducked low, driving my shoulder into his midsection and using his momentum to lift him off his feet. He crashed into the wall with a loud thud, crumpling to the ground in a heap. The first man, bleeding from his arm, glared at me with murderous intent. He was hurt but still dangerous, and he came at me again, this time more cautiously. But I was running on pure instinct now, my mind and body moving in perfect sync. I dodged his attacks, using the small space to my advantage until I saw an opening. With everything I had left, I drove my fist into his throat, a short, brutal punch that cut off his air and left him gasping. He staggered back, clutching his neck, his face twisted in pain and shock. I didn't wait for him to recover. I charged at him, knocking him to the ground and landing blow after blow until he stopped moving. Breathing hard, my body trembling with exhaustion, I stood up, looking around the room. The two men I had taken down were either unconscious or too injured to continue. The third man, the one who had started all this, was still bleeding from his nose, now standing at a distance with a look of shock and hesitation in his eyes. And then there was Rachel, standing off to the side, her expression unreadable as she watched the chaos unfold. The satisfaction I had seen in her earlier was gone, replaced by something else, something darker, more unsettling. I had fought back, had survived the attack they had planned for me, but as I looked into her eyes, I realized that the fight wasn't over. The worst was still yet to come. The room was a mess of blood, sweat, and shattered pride. My breath came in ragged gasps, my body trembling from the effort it had taken to survive the brutal attack. But despite the pain, despite the chaos, I had won. Or at least, that's what I wanted to believe. I had fought off the men who tried to break me, who tried to destroy everything I had left. But as I turned to look at Rachel, I realized the victory was hollow. Her expression, once full of cold satisfaction, had shifted to something more desperate, more frantic. She stood frozen for a moment, her eyes darting between me and the two men lying incapacitated on the floor. Then, without a word, she turned and bolted for the door. "Rachel, wait!" I shouted, my voice hoarse and strained. But she didn't stop. Her heels clacked loudly against the concrete as she ran, her movements quick and panicked. For a split second, I hesitated. My body screamed in protest at the thought of moving after everything I'd just been through. But then the fear took over. Fear for my children, fear for what she might do next, and I forced myself to chase after her. I stumbled forward, my vision still hazy, my legs threatening to give out beneath me. I pushed through the pain, through the dizziness, trying to catch up with her, but she was fast, her desperation fueling her flight. By the time I reached the doorway, she was already halfway down the hallway, her dark hair flying behind her like a banner of defiance. "Stop, Rachel!" I called after her, but my voice was weak, barely carrying over the pounding of my heart in my ears. I tried to pick up speed, tried to force my battered body to move faster, but it was no use. I was spent, my energy drained from the fight, and with every step I took, she only got further away. By the time I reached the exit, she had already disappeared into the night. I staggered out into the empty parking lot, my chest heaving as I scanned the dark streets for any sign of her. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound, just the oppressive silence of the deserted area. She was gone. Frustration and fear welled up inside me, the adrenaline from the fight quickly giving way to panic. Rachel was out there somewhere, and I had no idea what she might do next. The thought of her getting away, slipping through my fingers after everything she had done, was unbearable. But as much as I wanted to go after her, to hunt her down and make her answer for what she had done, I knew I couldn't leave our children alone. They were the most important thing in my life, and they were at home, unprotected, with no idea of the horror that had just unfolded. I couldn't risk Rachel trying to return to the house, potentially harming them in some twisted act of revenge. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. The seconds felt like hours as I waited for the operator to pick up, every beat of my heart a reminder of the urgency of the situation. 911. What's your emergency? The voice on the other end finally answered, calm and professional. My name is Alex. Alex Carter, I said, my voice trembling with fear and exhaustion. I need help. My wife, Rachel, she just attacked me. There are men, 2 men, in a building on the outskirts of town, but more importantly, our children, they're at home. I need you to send someone to protect them, please. The operator asked for my address, the details of the situation, but my mind was spinning, barely able to focus on the questions. All I could think about was Jack and Lily, alone in the house, vulnerable. We'll send officers to your home immediately, Mr. Carter, the operator assured me. Stay where you are. We're dispatching units to your location as well. Thank you, I managed to say, though the words felt hollow. The relief of knowing that help was on the way was tempered by the realization that Rachel was still out there somewhere, and I had no idea what she might do next. As I ended the call, I slumped against the wall of the building, my body finally giving in to the exhaustion that had been gnawing at me since the fight began. I couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the immediate need to keep breathing, to keep my heart from bursting out of my chest. The minutes dragged on, each one an eternity as I waited for the police to arrive. Every sound, every shadow that moved in the distance made me flinch, my mind conjuring up images of Rachel lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike again. Finally, I heard the distant wail of sirens, growing louder as they approached. Red and blue lights flashed against the walls of the building, illuminating the darkness as the police cars screeched to a halt in the parking lot. Several officers rushed toward me, their expressions a mix of concern and urgency. I tried to stand, but my legs gave out beneath me, and I crumpled to the ground, the fight leaving me completely drained. Mr. Carter, one of the officers called out as they approached, their voices echoing in the empty lot. Are you all right? I shook my head, my voice weak as I spoke. She got away. Rachel. She ran. The officers exchanged glances, their faces hardening as they processed what I said. We'll find her, one of them assured me. Right now, we need to get you checked out and make sure your kids are safe. I nodded numbly, letting them help me to my feet. But even as they led me to the waiting ambulance, even as the paramedics began tending to my injuries, my mind was somewhere else. On Rachel, on the nightmare she had turned my life into, and on the terrifying uncertainty of what she might do next. The hours that followed felt like a lifetime. I drifted in and out of consciousness, my body finally succumbing to the exhaustion and pain that had been chasing me since the fight. The hospital room was a blur of nurses, doctors, and detectives, each one asking questions, checking vitals, trying to piece together what had happened. But through it all, my thoughts were anchored to one thing. Rachel. I couldn't shake the image of her running into the night, the cruel smile on her lips as she left me behind. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone darker, more dangerous. And now she was out there, and I had no idea what she was capable of. Sometime after the doctors had finished stitching me up and checking for broken bones, Detective Harris returned to my room. His face was a mask of determination, but there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, something that made my heart skip a beat. She's been found, Mr. Carter, he said, his voice steady but laced with tension. We located her about an hour ago. The words hit me like a freight train, a mix of relief and dread crashing over me. I wanted her found, needed her stopped, but the reality of it was still hard to process. Where? I asked, my voice trembling. She was found at a motel on the outskirts of town, Harris explained, his tone measured. One of our patrol units spotted her car in the parking lot. She didn't resist when they approached her. She just surrendered. Surrendered? I repeated, struggling to comprehend. It seemed so unlike the Rachel I had seen earlier, the one who had orchestrated this entire nightmare. She didn't try to run? Didn't put up a fight? Harris continued, his expression unreadable. She just gave herself up. She's in custody now, being processed at the station. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. After everything she had done, after the horror she had put me through, she had just given up. It didn't make sense. Why? I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. Why would she just surrender? Harris shook his head, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were trying to piece it together himself. We don't know yet. She hasn't said much since we brought her in, but we were hoping you might be able to help us with that. I didn't know how to respond. The woman who had once been my wife, my partner, was now a mystery to me. A stranger. The idea that I could somehow help them understand her, help them figure out why she had done what she did, felt impossible. I barely understood it myself. "Can I see her?" I asked, surprising even myself with the question. I wasn't sure why I wanted to, wasn't sure what I expected to find. Maybe I thought seeing her would give me some kind of closure, some way to reconcile the woman I loved with the monster she had become. Harris hesitated, his eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge whether it was a good idea. "I'm not sure that's a good idea, Mr. Carter," he said carefully. "She's volatile right now, and after everything you've been through—" "Please," I interrupted, my voice stronger than I felt. "I need to see her. I need to understand." The detective sighed, nodding slowly. "All right, we can arrange for you to see her, but it'll have to be under controlled circumstances. We don't want to risk anything escalating." "Thank you," I whispered, my heart pounding in my chest as the reality of what I was asking for began to sink in. I was about to face the woman who had destroyed my life, who had torn apart everything I thought I knew, and I had no idea what I would find. The next few hours passed in a haze of anticipation and dread. I was cleared to leave the hospital, my injuries patched up, and my strength slowly returning. The police arranged for a car to take me to the station, and as I sat in the back seat staring out at the passing streets, a deep, unsettling fear began to creep into my chest. What would she say? What would she do? Could I even look her in the eye after what she had done? The station was a cold, gray building, its walls imposing and unforgiving. As I walked through the doors, flanked by officers, I felt like I was stepping into a different world. A world where the woman I loved had become my worst enemy. They led me down a long, narrow hallway, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. My heart pounded in my ears, each step bringing me closer to the confrontation I wasn't sure I was ready for. Finally, we stopped in front of a door, and Detective Harris turned to face me. "She's in here," he said quietly. "We'll be monitoring the conversation. If at any point you want to stop, just say the word." I nodded, my mouth dry, my hands trembling. The door opened with a soft creak, and I stepped inside. The room was small, sterile, with nothing but a table and 2 chairs. And there, on the other side of the table, sat Rachel. She looked different now, her hair disheveled, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She wasn't the confident, cruel woman I had seen in that abandoned building. She looked almost fragile. "Rachel," I whispered, my voice barely audible. She looked up at me, her eyes locking onto mine. There was no warmth there, no recognition of the love we had once shared, just a cold, detached gaze that sent a shiver down my spine. "You wanted to see me?" she said flatly, her voice devoid of emotion. I swallowed hard, trying to find the words. "Why, Rachel? Why did you do this?" She looked away, her expression unreadable. "I was tired," she said simply. "Tired of pretending. Tired of living a lie. I just couldn't do it anymore." "But to do this?" I asked, my voice breaking. "To destroy everything we had? Everything we built together?" She shrugged as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "We didn't have anything, Alex. Not really. It was all a facade, a game we played. I just decided to stop playing." The words cut deep, a fresh wound on top of the ones I was already carrying. I wanted to scream at her, to demand answers, to make her see the pain she had caused. But as I looked at her, I realized there was nothing left to salvage. The woman I had loved was gone, replaced by someone I didn't know, someone I could never understand. "I loved you," I whispered, the words falling from my lips like a confession. She met my gaze again, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something. Regret, sorrow, something human. But it was gone as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by that same cold detachment. "I know," she said softly, "but it wasn't enough." And with that, I knew it was over. There were no more words to be said, no more explanations to be given. The woman I had shared my life with was a stranger now, her actions a betrayal so deep it had severed whatever bond we once had. I stood up, my legs shaky, my heart heavy with the weight of everything I had lost. As I turned to leave, I heard her voice one last time, a whisper that echoed in the small room. "Goodbye, Alex." I didn't look back. I walked out of the room, out of the station, and into a world that would never be the same again. The days that followed my confrontation with Rachel were a blur of legal proceedings and emotional turmoil. I felt like I was moving through a fog, disconnected from the world around me. The bruises on my body slowly faded, but the wounds she had inflicted on my heart and soul remained raw, festering with every passing day. Filing for divorce was the first step, a necessary act to sever the legal ties that bound me to the woman who had destroyed my life. The paperwork was straightforward, cold and clinical, an end to a decade of marriage reduced to a few signatures on a page. But each pen stroke felt like another piece of my past being ripped away, leaving nothing but a hollow emptiness in its place. I should have felt relief, maybe even a sense of closure, but all I felt was anger. Anger at Rachel for what she had done, for the betrayal that had shattered everything I thought I knew. Anger at myself for not seeing it sooner, for being blind to the darkness that had been growing inside her all those years. But more than anything, I felt a burning desire for revenge. It wasn't enough that she was in custody, that she would face charges for what she had done. The legal system would take its course, but it wouldn't be enough to satisfy the rage that had taken root in my heart. I needed to make her pay, to ruin her life the way she had ruined mine. I needed to take away whatever happiness, whatever peace she might still have left. I started small. The first thing I did was empty our joint bank accounts, transferring every last dollar into a private account in my name. It wasn't much. Most of our savings had gone into the house, the kids' education, but it was enough to leave her with nothing. I knew the law would force me to divide the assets eventually, but for now, I wanted her to feel the sting of loss, the desperation of being cut off from the life she had grown accustomed to. Next, I contacted the landlord of the small apartment we had rented when we first got married, back when money was tight and we couldn't afford much. The lease was still in my name, a remnant of our early years that had been forgotten in the shuffle of life. I told him I wanted to terminate the lease immediately, to clear out whatever belongings she might still have there. It was petty, vindictive even, but the thought of her having nowhere to go, no place to call her own, gave me a dark sense of satisfaction. But it wasn't enough. None of it was enough to quell the rage that consumed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her face, heard her voice as she coldly explained why she had betrayed me, why she had thrown away everything we had built together. It haunted me, ate away at me until I couldn't think of anything else. I needed to do more. I needed to find a way to truly ruin her, to take away whatever hope or future she might still cling to. The opportunity came a few weeks later when I received a call from her lawyer. They wanted to discuss a settlement, a way to divide our assets without dragging the divorce through a lengthy court battle. The lawyer was polite, professional, but I could hear the desperation in his voice. Rachel was already feeling the effects of my actions, and she wanted to end this as quickly as possible. But I wasn't interested in a settlement. I didn't want to divide our assets fairly or give her a chance to rebuild her life. I wanted to destroy her, to leave her with nothing but the ashes of the life she had burned to the ground. So I made it clear to her lawyer that I wasn't going to play nice. I would fight her for every penny, for every piece of property, for custody of the kids. I would drag her through the mud, expose every dirty secret, every lie she had ever told. I would ruin her reputation, destroy her career, and make sure that everyone knew the kind of person she really was. And I could see the fear in the lawyer's eyes, hear it in his voice as he tried to negotiate, to find some middle ground. But there was no middle ground. Not anymore. I had been pushed too far, and now I was ready to push back with everything I had. It was a dark path I was walking, one that I never imagined I would take. But the more I thought about what she had done, the more I felt the need to hurt her, to make her feel the same pain and despair that she had inflicted on me. I wanted her to suffer, to lose everything, to be left with nothing but regret and misery. And as I sat in my lawyer's office, going over the details of the divorce, plotting my next move, I realized that I didn't care about the consequences anymore. I didn't care if I lost everything in the process, if I became just as twisted and broken as she was. All I cared about was making sure she paid for what she had done. I was no longer the man I used to be, the loving husband, the devoted father. That man had been destroyed the moment she betrayed me. Now I was something else, something darker. I was a man with nothing left to lose, and that made me dangerous. And as I looked out the window, the city lights reflecting in the glass, I made a vow to myself. I would ruin Rachel's life, destroy her completely, and I wouldn't stop until she had nothing left. Only then would I finally find peace. Months passed, and I immersed myself in the bitter process of dismantling the life Rachel and I had built together. The divorce dragged on, each hearing a battlefield where I fought to strip her of everything she held dear. I poured my energy into it, letting the anger and hatred fuel me, driving me to push harder, to dig deeper, to find every possible way to hurt her. I used the legal system like a weapon, filing motions, contesting claims, and fighting tooth and nail for every inch of ground. My lawyer, initially shocked by my ruthlessness, eventually came to understand that this wasn't about fairness or justice. It was about revenge. I wasn't interested in an amicable settlement or a clean break. I wanted her to suffer, to feel the same despair that she had forced upon me. The financial ruin was only the beginning. I used every resource at my disposal to destroy her reputation. I leaked details of her affair, the brutality of her betrayal, to anyone who would listen. Friends, colleagues, even strangers. It didn't matter. I wanted the world to see her for what she truly was, to shun her, to turn their backs on her the way she had turned her back on me. I took every opportunity to paint her as an unfit mother, fighting for sole custody of the kids. It was the most painful part of the process, dragging our children into the war that had consumed us, but in my mind it was necessary. I convinced myself that I was doing it to protect them, to shield them from the influence of a woman who had proven herself to be a monster. But deep down, I knew it was also about control, about taking away the one thing that might give her a reason to keep going. The court battles were long and grueling, each victory bringing me a hollow sense of satisfaction. Rachel's lawyer tried to fight back, but with each loss, I could see the toll it was taking on her. She looked more and more defeated each time we appeared in court. The weight of everything I had thrown at her crushing her spirit. The confident, cold woman who had orchestrated my nightmare was gone, replaced by someone who looked lost, broken. But even as I watched her crumble, I found no peace. The victories tasted bitter, the revenge I had so desperately sought leaving me empty inside. I had destroyed her life, just as I had set out to do, but it hadn't brought the closure I had hoped for. Instead, it had turned me into something I barely recognized. A man consumed by anger, bitterness, and a thirst for vengeance that could never be quenched. The final blow came on a cold, gray morning in December. We were back in court for what I knew would be the last time. The judge's decision was clear. Rachel would lose custody of the children, forced to settle for supervised visits. I had won. I had taken everything from her, her money, her reputation, her children. But as I watched her break down in tears, the satisfaction I had expected never came. Instead, I felt a gnawing emptiness, a sense that in destroying her, I had also destroyed a part of myself. After the hearing, I left the courthouse feeling like a ghost, hollow and aimless. The streets were busy with holiday shoppers, the air filled with the sounds of laughter and carols, but it all felt distant, like a world I no longer belonged to. I had spent so much time and energy on revenge that I hadn't stopped to think about what came next, about what kind of life I could have after the dust had settled. That evening, I returned to the house, a house that now felt more like a mausoleum, filled with memories that no longer brought me comfort. I poured myself a drink, staring out the window at the falling snow, the silence of the night pressing in on me. And that's when it hit me. The realization that I had won the battle, but lost the war. I had let my need for revenge consume me, had allowed it to drive me to the point where I had nothing left. My marriage was over, my family shattered, and I was left with a life in ruins, just like the one I'd created for Rachel. The victory felt meaningless. I had wanted to hurt her, to make her feel the same pain she had inflicted on me. But in doing so, I had only deepened my own suffering. The darkness that had driven me to this point now felt like a prison, trapping me in a cycle of anger and regret that I couldn't escape. I'd taken everything from her, but in the process, I had also taken everything from myself. As I sat there, the ice in my glass slowly melting, I realized that I had no idea who I was anymore. The man who had loved his wife, who had cherished his children, was gone, replaced by someone bitter, broken, and lost. The revenge that had once seemed so important, so necessary, had become a poison, eating away at whatever humanity I had left. And now, with nothing left to fight for, I was left alone in the darkness, with only my regrets for company. In the end, I had destroyed her life, but I had also destroyed my own. And as I sat there in the silence, I realized that there was no going back. The damage was done, and all that was left was the empty shell of a man who had lost everything in his quest for revenge.